Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sleepless Campfire. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of Maine's North Woods, places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these vast forests, frozen lakes, and isolated outposts are accounts drawn from Warden service reports, witness testimonies, and archived emergency broadcasts. Each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. These are the calls that have kept wardens awake long after their shifts ended, the encounters that defy explanation even to those who know these woods better than anyone. Now, let us begin with our first story. It was late October of 2014 when Warden Ryan Matthews began his final patrol of the season at Chamberlain Lake. The autumn colors had already surrendered to the approaching winter, leaving the landscape in shades of gray and brown. Matthews had worked this territory for 7 years, knowing every trail, every ridge, every inlet that dotted the massive body of water stretching across northern Maine. The radio in his truck crackled with intermittent static as he made his way along the eastern shore, checking fishing camps that would soon be abandoned until spring. The weather had turned unexpectedly that afternoon, with thick fog rolling in from the north, blanketing everything in a damp, cold embrace. Visibility had dropped to less than 50 feet in some areas, making navigation treacherous even for someone as familiar with the terrain as Matthews. At approximately 3:47 p.m., he radioed headquarters to report his position near the inlet of Allagash Stream, noting the deteriorating conditions. "Visibility near zero," his transmission stated, proceeding with caution to check the Johnson camp before heading back. That was the last official communication from Warden Matthews. When Matthews failed to report back by his scheduled 6:00 p.m. check-in, dispatch attempted to raise him on the radio. Nothing. They tried his cell phone, no signal, which wasn't unusual in this remote region. By 7:30 p.m., with darkness having fallen completely, 2 additional wardens were dispatched to follow Matthews's planned route. They found his truck parked near the Johnson camp, driver's side door ajar, headlights cutting through the thick fog. The engine was still running, though barely audible over the persistent hum of insects in the damp air. The radio was tuned to the service frequency, emitting only static. Matthew's flashlight lay on the ground beside the truck, its beam pointed toward the woods, batteries still strong. The search that followed was one of the most extensive in Maine Warden service history. For 17 days, teams combed the area around Chamberlain Lake, employing helicopters, tracking dogs, and experienced woodsmen. They found no footprints beyond those around the truck, no signs of struggle, no indication where Matthews might have gone. The Johnson camp showed no signs of disturbance. The door was locked, windows intact, everything as it should be. The only anomaly discovered was a single set of tracks leading into the forest, approximately 50 yards from the truck, then abruptly ending as if whoever made them had simply vanished into thin air. What makes this case particularly disturbing are the audio recordings recovered from Matthews' truck. The vehicle's dashboard camera had captured the ambient sounds from the final minutes before his disappearance. For the first 12 minutes, nothing unusual: the gentle lapping of water against the shore, the distant call of a loon, the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Then, at approximately 3:52 p.m., something else enters the recording. A faint rhythmic sound, almost like whispering, though no words can be distinguished. This continues for 3 minutes, growing slightly louder before Matthew's door opens. His footsteps are heard on the gravel, then silence for 47 seconds. Then comes the sound that has haunted every warden who has heard the recording: a single, clear word, spoken in what appears to be Matthew's voice. "Hello?" Following this, nothing but the natural sounds of the lake and forest. The official investigation concluded with no definitive answers. Matthews was declared legally dead in 2017, though his body has never been found. Theories abound among the Warden service that he encountered a hostile moose or bear, that he became disoriented in the fog and succumbed to the elements, that he simply walked away from his life. But none of these explanations account for the strange audio or the tracks that led nowhere. To this day, wardens patrolling Chamberlain Lake report an unusual silence in the area where Matthews disappeared, as if the natural world itself holds its breath in remembrance of whatever took him that foggy October afternoon. It was approaching midnight on December 5th, 2017, when Warden Sarah Jenkins received the call that would trouble her for years to come. She was stationed at the Millinocket Regional Office, monitoring radio communications for the northern sector of Baxter State Park. The winter had come early that year, with temperatures already dropping well below freezing and snow accumulating in the higher elevations. Most sensible hikers had retreated from the mountains weeks ago, leaving the park to the hardiest wildlife and the occasional research team. At 11:42 p.m., a transmission broke through the usual nighttime static on Channel 7, the emergency frequency reserved for park rangers and research personnel. The voice that came through was distorted, barely recognizable as human, but Jenkins could make out enough to understand it was a distress call. "Station, something wrong here. Not alone." The transmission cut in and out, as if something was interfering with the signal. Jenkins attempted to respond, but her transmission seemed to go unanswered. For the next 23 minutes, the voice continued to break through intermittently, each time becoming more frantic, less coherent. What made these transmissions particularly unsettling was their origin. According to the signal triangulation equipment, they were coming from somewhere near Chimney Pond, approximately 4 miles into the park from the nearest road. More troubling, the signal appeared to be moving first near the pond, then ascending toward the higher elevations of Catah Dean's tableland. This was impossible in December, when that area should be completely inaccessible due to ice and snow accumulation. Jenkins radioed the 2 wardens on duty, requesting they check the Chimney Pond area at first light, though she privately doubted they would find anyone alive in those conditions. The transmissions continued until 12:05 a.m., when they stopped abruptly. The final words captured were chilling in their clarity. "It's here. It's here. It's," followed by a sound that Jenkins described in her official report as similar to radio feedback, but with an organic quality, like something breathing into the microphone. After that, only static remained on Channel 7 for the rest of her shift. When the morning came, Wardens Michael Torres and David Chen hiked to Chimney Pond, finding the ranger cabin locked and undisturbed with no indication anyone had been there since late October. They searched the surrounding area for hours, discovering no footprints in the snow other than their own and those of wildlife. The radio equipment in the cabin showed no signs of tampering. Torres noted in his report that the temperature at Chimney Pond that morning was negative 14 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chills approaching 40 below conditions that would make survival for more than a few hours nearly impossible without proper equipment. The investigation that followed revealed no registered research teams or expeditions in the park at that time. No permits had been issued for winter camping in that sector. All known parties who might have had access to Channel 7 were accounted for. The radio logs showed no equipment checked out to anyone who should have been in that area. In essence, no one should have been making those transmissions. Yet the recordings remained as undeniable evidence that someone or something had been calling for help from the frozen slopes of Maine's highest peak. What makes this case particularly disturbing to the Warden Service is not just the mystery of who was making the calls, but what they were running from. The increasing panic in the voice, the mention of not being alone, the final desperate words before that strange breathing sound all suggest something more than simply being lost in the wilderness. Several wardens who have listened to the recordings report feeling an inexplicable sense of dread, as if whatever was pursuing the unknown caller might still be out there, waiting in the frozen vastness of the North Woods. To this day, Channel 7 is monitored more carefully than any other frequency in the park, though most wardens privately hope they never again hear anything like those December transmissions from Katahdin. It was early September of 2019 when Warden James Wilson first noticed the anomaly while reviewing trail camera footage from the Allagash Wilderness Waterway. The cameras were part of a wildlife monitoring project that had been in place for 3 years, capturing images of animals along the popular canoe route. Wilson had been assigned to catalog the footage, a routine task that usually revealed little more than moose, deer, and the occasional bear. But the images from Camera 7, positioned near Round Pond, showed something that shouldn't exist. The first strange image appeared on September 3rd at 4:17 a.m. It showed what appeared to be a humanoid figure standing at the water's edge, approximately 75 yards from the camera. The figure was tall, estimated at over 7 feet, and unnaturally thin, with proportions that didn't match any human Wilson had ever seen. What was most disturbing was that the figure appeared to be composed of darkness itself, absorbing rather than reflecting light, making its exact features impossible to distinguish. It stood motionless for 3 consecutive frames before simply disappearing between images, with no indication of movement toward or away from the camera. Wilson initially assumed the image was an artifact, a trick of light, a camera malfunction, perhaps a tree branch that had fallen and created an unusual shadow. He set the images aside to review later. But when he continued through the footage, more anomalies appeared. On September 7th, at 2:23 a.m., the figure appeared again, this time closer to the camera, though still maintaining its impossible darkness. On September 12th, it appeared near a group of campers who were visible sleeping in their tents, standing motionless for nearly 5 minutes before vanishing again. What chilled Wilson most was that in this series of images, the figure appeared to be looking directly at the camera, as if aware it was being observed. The breaking point came on September 19th, when the figure appeared in broad daylight at 10:42 a.m. This was impossible, as the camera's infrared function should have prevented such an anomaly during daylight hours. Yet there it was, a patch of absolute darkness standing against the sunlit forest, so out of place that Wilson felt a cold dread wash over him as he stared at the monitor. He immediately reported his findings to his supervisor, Warden Sergeant Rebecca Hall. Hall was initially skeptical, suggesting camera malfunction or tampering. But when she reviewed the footage herself, her professional demeanor faltered. The images were undeniable. Something was appearing and disappearing along the Allagash waterway, something that defied logical explanation. The decision was made to retrieve all cameras from the area and send them for technical analysis. Wilson was tasked with collecting Camera 7, the one that had captured most of the anomalies. What happened during that collection would haunt Wilson for the rest of his career. He arrived at Round Pond on September 21st, a clear autumn day with perfect visibility. As he approached the camera's location, he felt an inexplicable chill despite the mild temperature. The forest around him seemed unusually quiet, with no birdsong or insect noise. When he reached the camera, he found it hanging from its mounting, straps cut cleanly, as if by a sharp blade. As he examined it, he became aware of a presence behind him. Wilson described what happened next in his official report. "I turned to find myself facing a figure matching the images from the camera footage. It stood approximately 20 feet away, unnaturally still, seemingly absorbing the light around it. I could discern no features, only a shape that was darker than any shadow I have ever witnessed. It made no sound, showed no movement. Yet I felt an overwhelming sense of menace, as if I was being sized up as prey. I drew my service weapon and ordered it to show its hands, though I knew even as I spoke how absurd this was. The figure remained motionless for what felt like several minutes, though it was likely only seconds. Then, without turning or moving in any way I could perceive, it was simply gone. Wilson radioed for immediate backup, though he was ashamed to admit what he had witnessed. When other wardens arrived 15 minutes later, they found no footprints, no disturbed vegetation, no evidence that anyone had been there besides Wilson himself. The camera was taken for analysis, which revealed no technical malfunction. The images were authentic, though unexplainable. Wilson was temporarily reassigned to desk duty while the incident was investigated, though no official explanation was ever recorded. The round pond cameras were never replaced, and that section of the Allagash waterway is now quietly avoided by most wardens when possible. Some whisper among the service that the figure Wilson encountered is the same entity spoken of in old Penobscot legends, a shadow being that haunts the deepest forests, appearing to those who wander too far from civilization. Whatever it was, its image remains in the archives of the Maine Warden Service, a silent testament to the mysteries that still lurk in the North Woods. It was late May of 2021 when two hikers discovered the damaged audio recorder near Katahdin Stream Campground. Sarah Mitchell and Tom Riley were experienced backpackers making their way through Baxter State Park during the brief period between snowmelt and black fly season. They had set up camp approximately 2 miles from the main campground when Mitchell noticed something glinting in the sunlight. Near the trail, a small digital recorder, partially buried in mud and showing signs of having been exposed to the elements for some time. What made the discovery unusual was not just finding expensive electronic equipment in the wilderness, but the condition in which it was found. The recorder was a professional-grade model, the type used by journalists or researchers, with a rugged exterior designed to withstand rough handling. Yet, it had been damaged in a strange way. The casing appeared to have been partially melted, as if exposed to extreme heat. Yet the surrounding vegetation showed no signs of fire. The memory card, however, seemed intact, and Mitchell, curious about what might be recorded, carefully removed it and placed it in a protective case. The hikers turned the recorder over to park rangers the next day, noting the strange circumstances of their discovery. Rangers initially assumed it belonged to a researcher who had lost it during the previous season, but no reports of missing equipment had been filed. The memory card was sent to the State Forensics Lab for analysis, where technicians managed to recover several audio files despite water damage to the card itself. What those recordings contained would become one of the most perplexing cases in the history of the Maine Warden Service. The first 3 files appeared to be routine field notes, possibly from a biologist studying bird populations in the park. A calm, professional voice described species observed, weather conditions, and other scientific observations. These recordings were dated May 15, 16, and 17 of the previous year. The 4th file, dated May 18th, began similarly, but took a disturbing turn approximately 3 minutes in. In this recording, the researcher's voice becomes hesitant, concerned. "There's something out here," the voice notes. "Not an animal I recognize. The tracks are wrong, too large for a bear, wrong shape for a moose. Almost human, but the stride length is impossible." The recording continues with the researcher following what appears to be a trail of tracks, describing them in detail. 5-toed impressions, but spaced too far apart. Whatever made these was moving fast, yet there's no sign of weight displacement in the soil. It's as if it was barely touching the ground. The 5th file, dated later the same day, captures the researcher's growing unease. "I've been hearing something for the past hour. A whistling sound, but with a rhythm that's too regular to be natural. It seems to be keeping pace with me, though I never see anything. The wildlife here has gone. Completely silent, no birds, no squirrels, nothing. Even the insects have stopped their noise. The recording continues with the researchers setting up what appears to be an automated recording device before bedding down for the night. If whatever is out there comes close tonight, I want to capture it. The sixth file is where the recording becomes truly disturbing. It appears to be the automated capture from the night of May 18th. For the first 2 hours, only natural sounds can be heard: wind rustling through trees, the distant call of an owl. Then, at approximately 2:17 a.m., a new sound begins, a low, rhythmic humming that seems to move around the researchers' campsite. This continues for several minutes before being joined by what sounds like heavy footsteps circling the tent. The researcher can be heard stirring, then unzipping the tent. What follows is difficult to describe in words. The researcher's voice, now filled with what can only be described as terror, whispers into the recorder. My God, it's standing right there, just outside the light. It's impossibly tall. The shape is wrong, all wrong. A pause, then. It's looking at me. I can feel it. The eyes there are too many. This is followed by a strange clicking sound, then what appears to be the researcher fumbling with equipment. The final sounds captured are a scream that cuts off abruptly, followed by several minutes of silence. Then the sound of something moving away through the forest. The seventh and final file appears to have been recorded the next morning by someone else, a different voice, clearly distressed. Found the camp, torn apart. No sign of Henderson. Blood on the tent flap, but not enough to suggest a fatal injury. Whatever took him left these tracks, the same ones he was recording yesterday. They lead north toward the tableland, then just stop at the base of the cliff. It's as if whatever made them went straight up the rock face. The recording ends with, "I'm leaving the recorder here, taking Henderson's notes back. This is beyond anything we've encountered before. I don't know what's in these woods, but it's not in any field guide." The Maine Warden Service launched an extensive search for the missing researcher, identified as Dr. Alan Henderson, a biologist from the University of Maine who had been conducting a bird migration study in the park. Despite weeks of searching, no trace of Henderson was ever found beyond his abandoned campsite. The strange tracks mentioned in the recording were documented by investigators, though they defied identification by wildlife experts. The case remains officially open, though most believe Henderson fell victim to some unknown predator or perhaps a mental breakdown that led him into the wilderness unprepared. What troubles those who have heard the recordings is not just what they capture, but the authenticity that seems undeniable in the researcher's voice. The progression from scientific curiosity to growing unease to outright terror feels genuine, as does the final recording by the unknown colleague. The Maine Warden Service keeps the original recordings in a secure evidence locker, though copies have circulated quietly among rangers and researchers who work in the state's most remote wilderness areas. To this day, some who have listened to the final recording report hearing something in the background, a faint clicking or whistling sound that they can't quite identify, yet which haunts their dreams long after the recording has ended. It was early November of 2015 when Warden David Miller first heard the old story from a retired logger named Gus Thibodeau. Miller had stopped at Thibodeau's cabin near the Quebec border to check on him as part of his regular patrol of the remote region. The conversation, as it often did with old-timers, turned to strange happenings in the woods. That's when Thibodeau mentioned what locals used to call Bigfoot Mountain, a peak in the chain between the St. John and Allagash watersheds that had earned its name long before the term Bigfoot entered popular culture. According to Thibodeau, The mountain had been considered cursed or haunted by the Penobscot people long before loggers arrived in the late 1800s. They spoke of a creature that lived there taller than any man, covered in dark hair, able to move through the forest without making a sound. Most dismissed these stories as folklore, but strange incidents continued through the logging boom of the early 20th century. Loggers' camps near the mountain reported unusual occurrences, tools disappearing, strange footprints around camps in the morning, unsettling howls that didn't match any known animal. What caught Miller's attention was Thibodeau's mention of a specific incident from 1978, when a group of game wardens had investigated reports of the creature and had documented something that had never been properly explained. They found tracks, Thibodeau recalled, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Not just a few, but a whole trail of them, led right up to a cabin where two trappers had disappeared. The wardens took plaster casts, photographs, everything. Then the state told them to drop it, said it was a bear, and that was that. Intrigued, Miller began researching the incident in the Warden Service archives. He found a thin file labeled Allagash Incident, 1978, that contained little more than a brief report and a few photographs. The report, written by Sergeant Frank Whitmore, described an investigation into the disappearance of two trappers, Jean-Paul Bouchard and Michel Leblanc, who had last been seen on November 3, 1978. Their cabin was found abandoned on November 7th, with signs of a struggle but no blood or indication of what had happened to them. What made the report unusual were the photographs attached. They showed a series of footprints in the snow around the cabin impressions that were clearly not made by any human or animal known to inhabit Maine. The prints were large, approximately 16 inches in length, with a stride that measured over 6 feet in places. They circled the cabin several times before leading off into the forest, where they were eventually lost in rocky terrain. The photographs also showed damage to the cabin door, a series of deep gouges that appeared to have been made by something with enormous strength and sharp claws. The most disturbing part of the file was a handwritten note at the bottom of the last page, apparently added after the initial report. Spoke with Chief Warden about the evidence. He advised me to classify this as a bear attack and close the file. When I questioned this directive, he informed me that similar incidents had been documented over the years and that the state preferred not to encourage speculation about what might be living in the more remote areas of the North Woods. I have complied with this directive, but I cannot in good conscience attribute these tracks or the damage to the cabin to any bear species I am familiar with. Miller's curiosity led him to seek out Whitmore, who had retired in the 1990s and was living in southern Maine. The former warden, now in his 80s, was reluctant to discuss the case at first, but eventually agreed to share what he remembered. I've never seen anything like those tracks before or since, Whitmore told Miller, and the sounds we heard that night like nothing I've experienced in 40 years of working in the woods. Something was out there, something that didn't belong. I think it took those men. Whitmore described how he and 2 other wardens had followed the tracks from the cabin for nearly 3 miles before losing them near a rocky outcropping. As they prepared to turn back, they heard a sound from the ridge above them, a deep, guttural call that echoed through the forest. It wasn't a bear, Whitmore insisted. It wasn't anything I'd ever heard. And then we saw it just a silhouette against the sky, but enormous. Must have been 8 or 9 feet tall. It watched us for a moment, then moved back into the trees without making a sound. We didn't follow. We couldn't. Miller's investigation eventually led him to speak with several other current and former wardens who had similar stories to tell sightings of large bipedal creatures in remote areas. Strange footprints that couldn't be explained. Encounters that defied rational explanation. None of these incidents had been officially documented, dismissed as misidentifications or simply not reported to avoid ridicule. Yet the consistency of the accounts was striking. What Miller found most compelling was that these stories weren't limited to the North Woods of Maine. Similar accounts existed from forestry workers, hunters, and indigenous peoples across the northern forests of North America. The Penobscot name for the creature was Keichipequas, which roughly translates to giant man. The Maliseet called it Wolastokiik, meaning one who walks like a man but is not a man. These stories had existed long before European settlement, suggesting that whatever was being encountered was not a recent phenomenon, but something that had coexisted with humans in these forests for centuries. Miller compiled his findings into a comprehensive report that he submitted to his superiors in early 2016. The response was not what he expected. Rather than opening an official investigation, he was advised to drop the matter, told that the Warden Service didn't have the resources to investigate folklore. His report was filed away with a notation that it was not to be circulated or referenced in official communications. Today, Miller still patrols the same remote region where he first heard Thibodeau's story. He's never seen the creature himself, but he's found evidence that convinces him something unusual inhabits these woods. Strange tracks that don't match any known animal. Enormous structures made of broken tree limbs that serve no apparent purpose. Sounds that don't belong to any wildlife he's familiar with. He no longer reports these findings, knowing they will only be dismissed. But he remains watchful, aware that the North Woods of Maine hold mysteries that defy easy explanation, and that somewhere in those vast forests, something ancient and largely unseen continues to elude documentation, existing in the space between folklore and reality. It was approaching midnight on October 31st, 2018, when dispatcher Emily Roberts received the call that would trouble her for years to come. She was working the graveyard shift at the Greenville Regional Communications Center, handling routine calls and monitoring the various radio frequencies used by emergency services across northern Maine. The night had been quiet so far, with only a few minor incidents reported: a lost hunter who had found his way back to camp, a minor vehicle accident on Route 15, a false alarm at a lumber mill. Nothing unusual for a Halloween night in the North Woods. At 11:47 p.m., a call came in on the emergency line from a satellite phone, which immediately struck Roberts as unusual. Most people in the remote areas carried personal locator beacons or used traditional radio frequencies for emergencies. Satellite phones were expensive and generally reserved for research teams or corporate expeditions. The voice that came through the line was breathless, panicked, barely coherent. "This is Dr. Eleanor Vance from the Debs-Koniag Research Station," the caller stated, her words tumbling over each other. "We need help. Something's out here. It's trying to get in." Roberts immediately began following standard emergency protocol, asking for the caller's location, the nature of the emergency, how many people were involved. But Vance seemed unable to focus on these questions, her attention clearly directed elsewhere. "It's been circling the cabin for hours," Vance continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "First, we heard it on the perimeter sensors, something large, moving too quietly for an animal that size. Then we saw it through the thermal imager. God, the shape of it's wrong. All wrong." Roberts could hear what sounded like heavy breathing in the background, interspersed with occasional scratching noises, as if something was testing the walls of the cabin. Roberts radioed the two wardens on duty in the region, Warden Mark Thompson and Warden Lisa Chen, alerting them to the emergency call. Debs-Koniag was a remote research station approximately 12 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by foot or boat. The wardens would need at least 3 hours to reach the location, even if they left immediately. Roberts tried to keep Vance on the line, gathering what information she could while the wardens prepared. There are 4 of us here, Vance explained, her voice trembling. We're studying the impact of climate change on boreal forest ecosystems. We've been here for 6 weeks with no incidents. Until tonight. Roberts could hear another voice in the background, a male voice saying something about the doors and windows being reinforced. We've barricaded ourselves in the main cabin, Vance continued. The smaller outbuildings, something tore them apart. We heard the screaming about an hour ago. It was Martin. He was in the equipment shed. We couldn't get to him in time. Roberts felt a chill run down her spine as she listened, her professional demeanor momentarily faltering. In her 10 years as a dispatcher, she had handled hundreds of emergency calls, but none quite like this. The genuine terror in Vance's voice was palpable, as was the strange combination of scientific precision and primal fear in her description of whatever was outside the cabin. The thermal readings are impossible, Vance said, her voice taking on a more analytical tone despite the fear. Whatever it is, it doesn't register heat signatures like any mammal should. The imager shows cold spots, as if it's absorbing rather than emitting heat. And the size based on the distortion it creates in the air around it. I'd estimate it's at least 9 feet tall, possibly more. In the background, Roberts could hear what sounded like a low, rhythmic thumping, as if something large was testing the structure of the cabin. At 12:13 a.m., the connection was suddenly lost. Roberts attempted to call back, but the satellite phone wouldn't connect. She radioed the wardens with an update, informing them that contact had been lost and that they should approach the research station with caution. The next 2 hours were agonizing for Roberts as she waited for updates, monitoring various frequencies for any sign of the wardens or the research team. The first report came at 2:28 a.m. We're approaching the research station now. Warden Thompson's voice came through the radio, strained and breathless. There's something wrong here. The outbuildings have been torn apart, completely destroyed. There's blood on the ground near what's left of the equipment shed. A pause, then. The main cabin is dark. No lights, no movement. We're approaching cautiously. What happened next was relayed to Roberts in fragmented, panicked transmissions. The door's been torn off its hinges, Thompson reported. There's blood everywhere. Signs of a struggle, but no body. A moment of silence, then. Wait, there's someone here. Under the table. It's Vance. She's alive, but barely conscious. Another pause. Then Chen's voice came through the radio. My God, Thompson, look at this. The walls, they've been shredded. Whatever did this came through the walls, not the door. Roberts listened in horror as the wardens described the scene. The research cabin had been breached from multiple directions, with large holes torn through the walls as if something had simply walked through them. The furniture was overturned, scientific equipment smashed, blood spattered across walls and floor. 3 of the 4 researchers were missing Martin, as Vance had mentioned, and 2 others, Sarah and Daniel. Only Vance remained, found unconscious under a sturdy research table, her arm broken and suffering from severe hypothermia. The most disturbing discovery was what the wardens found outside the cabin. A series of tracks led away from the research station into the forest, impressions that defied identification. They were larger than any human footprints, with a stride that measured over 7 feet in places. What was most unsettling was that they appeared in a straight line, with no variation in depth or spacing, as if whatever made them moved with impossible consistency and balance. Vance was airlifted to a hospital in Bangor, where she recovered from her physical injuries but remained in what doctors described as a state of severe psychological trauma. She was unable to provide a coherent account of what had happened that night, though she occasionally muttered about the cold shadow and too many eyes when questioned by investigators. The missing researchers were never found, despite extensive searches of the surrounding area. The official report classified the incident as an unidentified animal attack. Though privately, the wardens who responded that night admitted they had never encountered any animal capable of the destruction they witnessed at Debskoniag. The research station was never reopened, and the area is now quietly avoided by most who work in the region. Roberts eventually transferred to a different dispatch center, unable to forget the terror in Vance's voice or the strange details of that Halloween night in the North Woods. To this day, when training new dispatchers, she sometimes plays the recording of that call, though she never explains what happened after the connection was lost, leaving them to wonder what could have prompted such terror in a team of experienced researchers working in the wilderness they knew so well. It was early August of 2020 when the most severe storm in decades hit the Nahmakanta region of Maine's North Woods. Meteorologists later classified it as a derecho, a widespread, long-lived windstorm that was particularly unusual for the area. Winds reached speeds of over 100 miles per hour in some locations, toppling thousands of trees and leaving the region devastated. What made this storm particularly troubling for the Maine Warden Service was not just its destructive power, but what was discovered in its aftermath. Warden Jessica Rodriguez had been stationed at the Nahmakanta Lake Campground for 3 seasons and knew the area better than most. When the storm approached on August 4th, she assisted with evacuating the few campers who were in the area, directing them to safer locations until the weather passed. By late afternoon, the campground was empty except for Rodriguez and her partner, Warden Tom Richardson, who had hunkered down in the reinforced ranger station to ride out the storm. The storm hit with unexpected ferocity around 4:30 p.m. The wind howled through the trees, creating a deafening roar that made conversation nearly impossible. Rain fell in horizontal sheets, visibility dropping to near zero. The ranger station, built to withstand severe weather, creaked and groaned under the assault. Rodriguez and Richardson monitored emergency frequencies, coordinating response efforts with other agencies and documenting the storm's progression. What neither warden could have anticipated was the strange transmission that broke through the storm's static at approximately 6:17 p.m. It came on the emergency frequency used by the Warden Service, though the voice was not one they recognized. The signal was weak, distorted by the storm, but the words that came through were chilling in their clarity. "It's using the storm. It's hunting with the storm." This was followed by what sounded like a scream that was cut off abruptly, then nothing but static. Rodriguez immediately attempted to respond, asking for the caller's location and status. There was no reply. She tried several more times over the next hour, but the frequency remained silent except for the storm's interference. The transmission was logged, but with the storm still raging and multiple emergency situations developing across the region, there was little that could be done to investigate its source at that moment. The storm finally passed around 10:30 p.m., leaving behind a landscape transformed by its violence. Trees were down everywhere, many snapped off halfway up their trunks, others uprooted entirely. Roads were blocked, trails impassable. Power lines were down across the region. The full extent of the damage would only become visible in the morning light. What Rodriguez and Richardson discovered at dawn would haunt them for the rest of their careers. While conducting an initial assessment of the damage around the ranger station, they came upon a scene that made no sense in the context of a natural disaster. Approximately 300 yards from the station, a small camper trailer had been torn apart not by the wind, which had primarily affected trees and structures above ground level, but by what appeared to be immense force from multiple directions. The metal siding was ripped and twisted, the frame bent at impossible angles. What was most disturbing was that the destruction appeared to have come from within, as if something had exploded outward from inside the trailer. Nearby, Rodriguez found something that chilled her to the bone, a series of tracks in the mud created by the storm's rainfall. They were not human footprints, nor did they match any animal native to Maine. The impressions were large, deeply pressed into the ground as if bearing enormous weight. Yet they showed no signs of the slippage that would be expected in such muddy conditions. What was most unsettling was their arrangement, not in a line indicating movement, but in a circular pattern around the destroyed trailer, as if whatever made them had been methodically circling their prey. Richardson radioed headquarters to report the discovery, requesting immediate backup and a forensic team. While they waited, they continued to document the scene, taking photographs and measurements. It was Rodriguez who found the camera near what remained of the trailer's door, a waterproof model similar to those used by wildlife researchers. Though damaged by whatever had destroyed the trailer, the memory card appeared intact. When forensic analysts later examined the card, they found a series of images that defied explanation. The first few showed the trailer and surrounding area as the storm began to intensify. Then came images of what appeared to be a large, dark figure moving through the trees during the height of the storm. The figure was barely visible through the rain and wind, but its size was evident standing well above the 8-foot-tall pines surrounding the campsite. What was most disturbing was that the storm seemed to part around it, as if it was somehow immune to the winds that were tearing apart everything else. The final images showed the figure approaching the trailer, then a series of blurry, chaotic shots that appeared to capture the destruction from within. The last clear image showed what appeared to be a hand or claw reaching toward the camera, something impossibly large, with what looked like too many joints or fingers. Then, nothing but darkness. The investigation that followed revealed that the trailer belonged to a freelance journalist named Michael Reeves, who had been working on a book about strange phenomena in the North Woods. Reeves was never found, though his passport and other identification were discovered in the wreckage of the trailer. The official report classified his death as storm-related fatality, though privately, the wardens and investigators who examined the scene admitted that the evidence pointed to something far more disturbing. What troubles Rodriguez most is not just what she found that morning, but the implications of the strange transmission received during the storm. It's using the storm. It's hunting with the storm. The words suggest intelligence, purpose a predator that had somehow learned to use natural disasters as cover for its activities. The idea that something like that might exist in the North Woods, unseen and largely undocumented, is more frightening than any storm. Today, the area where Reeves's trailer was found has been left to return to its natural state, though few wardens patrol there willingly. The storm of August 2020 has been recorded as one of Maine's worst natural disasters. But those who know what was discovered in its aftermath understand that the storm was merely a backdrop for something far more terrifying. In the vast wilderness of the North Woods, there are still mysteries that defy explanation, and the line between natural and supernatural sometimes blurs in ways that challenge our understanding of the world. It was late September of 2022 when Warden Marcus Hayes began what would be his final patrol in the Eagle Lake region of the North Woods. Hayes was a 15-year veteran of the Maine Warden Service, known for his quiet competence and deep knowledge of the territory he patrolled. He had spent most of his career in the northern districts, developing a reputation for finding lost hikers and navigating terrain that challenged even experienced woodsmen. The autumn of 2022 had been unusually dry, with forest fire concerns keeping the Warden Service busy as hunters and outdoor enthusiasts took advantage of the pleasant weather. Hayes left the Eagle Lake Regional Office at 8 a.m. on September 29th, planning to check several remote camps along the Canadian border before returning by evening. His truck was equipped with the standard gear first aid supplies, emergency rations, a winch for extracting vehicles from difficult terrain, and a satellite phone for areas where radio communication was unreliable. He was dressed in his uniform, with a sidearm and the standard issue rifle that most wardens carried for protection against aggressive wildlife. The first communication from Hayes came at 9:17 a.m., when he radioed to report his position near St. Croix Lake. "Everything clear so far," his transmission stated. "No issues at the Anderson camp. Heading north to check the shoreline camps." This was routine, the kind of update wardens provided throughout their shifts to maintain situational awareness across the service area. The second communication came at 11:42 a.m., when Hayes reported reaching the camps near Square Lake. "All camps secure here," he transmitted. "Found some unusual tracks near the Prescott camp, too large for a bear, wrong shape for a moose. We'll document before moving on." This was not entirely unusual. Wardens occasionally encountered tracks that didn't immediately match known wildlife, though they typically turned out to be misidentifications or unusual but natural phenomena. What was unusual was Hayes's third transmission, which came at 1:28 p.m. His voice sounded strained, concerned. "Following the tracks from the Prescott camp," he reported. "They led north toward the border. Something's not right here. The stride length is impossible for any animal I know. Still no sign of the animal itself." Dispatch acknowledged the transmission and asked if he needed assistance. Hayes declined, stating that he would document the tracks and continue his patrol as planned. At 2:53 p.m., Hayes's final transmission came through. It was brief, urgent. "Found something you need to see here," he stated. "At the old fire tower on Arnold Brook Hill. The tracks lead right to it. There's..." The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by static. Dispatch attempted to raise Hayes multiple times over the next several minutes, but received no response. His satellite phone was not answering either. When Hayes failed to check in by his scheduled 5:00 p.m. deadline, a search was initiated. 2 wardens were dispatched to follow his planned route, beginning with the fire tower mentioned in his final transmission. They reached the location at approximately 6:45 p.m., finding Hayes's truck parked at the base of the hill. The engine was cold, suggesting it had been there for some time. The driver's side door was ajar, though there was no sign of struggle around the vehicle. What the wardens found at the fire tower would become one of the most perplexing cases in the history of the Maine Warden Service. The wooden structure, built in the 1930s and long since abandoned, showed signs of recent activity. The stairs leading to the cabin at the top were damaged, as if something too heavy for them had ascended. The door to the cabin hung from one hinge, torn open with enormous force. Inside the cabin, the wardens found Hayes's radio and satellite phone, both damaged beyond repair. His flashlight lay on the floor, its lens cracked but still functional. The most disturbing discovery was a series of deep scratches on the wooden walls marks that appeared to have been made by something with enormous strength and sharp claws. Some were nearly an inch deep, cutting through decades of weathered wood as if it were soft clay. The search for Hayes expanded over the following days, eventually involving more than 50 wardens, search and rescue teams, and volunteers from surrounding communities. Tracking dogs were brought in, though they seemed unusually agitated in the area around the fire tower, refusing to follow any particular scent trail. Helicopters conducted aerial searches, though the dense forest canopy made visibility difficult. Divers checked nearby bodies of water, though nothing was found. What made the search particularly challenging were the tracks found around the fire tower. They matched the description Hayes had provided in his earlier transmissions, large impressions with an impossible stride length. The tracks circled the fire tower several times before leading off into the forest, where they were eventually lost in rocky terrain. What was most unsettling was that they appeared in places where no human or animal should have been able to traverse across steep rock faces, through dense thickets that should have been impassable, up the sides of cliffs where no footing was visible. The investigation into Hayes's disappearance revealed little concrete information. He was a respected warden, with no known enemies. His personal life showed no signs of trouble that might have led him to vanish voluntarily. His financial records were normal, with no unusual activity in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. He was, by all accounts, a dedicated professional who loved his work and the wilderness he patrolled. What the investigation did uncover were other similar incidents from the past 50 years' reports of unusually large tracks, sightings of tall bipedal figures in remote areas, encounters that defied logical explanation. None of these incidents had been officially documented, dismissed as misidentifications or simply not reported to avoid ridicule. Yet the consistency of the accounts was striking, suggesting that Hayes might have encountered something that others had seen but rarely spoken of. The official report on Hayes's disappearance classified it as unknown, presumed deceased, though no body was ever found and no definitive explanation was ever provided. Privately, many wardens believe he encountered something extraordinary that day in the North Woods, something that had been largely undocumented but occasionally encountered by those who spent enough time in the most remote areas of the state. Today, a small plaque at the Eagle Lake Regional Office commemorates Hayes's service to the Maine Warden Service. His case remains officially open, though most acknowledge that it will likely never be solved. The fire tower on Arnold Brook Hill still stands, though few wardens visit it anymore. Those who do report an unusual silence in the area, as if the natural world itself holds its breath in remembrance of whatever took Marcus Hayes on that September afternoon in the North Woods. The Maine North Woods remain vast and unknowable, a wilderness that has resisted complete understanding despite centuries of exploration. The stories we've shared tonight represent only a fraction of the strange encounters documented by the Maine Warden Service incidents that challenge our understanding of the natural world and remind us that not everything can be explained by science or logic. These accounts, verified yet unexplained, suggest that in the most remote corners of our country, mysteries still exist that defy easy categorization. What connects these stories is not just their setting in the rugged wilderness of northern Maine, but the genuine confusion and fear experienced by those who witnessed them firsthand. Wardens trained to identify wildlife, track lost individuals, and respond to emergencies found themselves confronting phenomena that fell outside their training and experience. In each case, something ancient and largely unseen reminded us that the natural world still holds secrets we have yet to uncover. The silence that follows these encounters is perhaps more telling than the events themselves. The reluctance of officials to document or discuss such incidents, the quiet avoidance of certain areas by those who know what happened there, the unspoken acknowledgement among those who work in the wilderness that some things are better left uninvestigated, all suggest a world that operates beyond our understanding, where the line between reality and myth sometimes blurs in ways that challenge our perception of what is possible. If you or someone you know has a true story to share about unexplained encounters in America's wilderness, leave it in the comments below. The Sleepless Campfire team reviews every submission,